Hello, this is Christian. In this video, I'm going to go over the function component or the stateless component in React. But first, let's take a look at data flow and how data flows and works in React. Now, in React, data flows in one direction only, from the parent down to the child component. It's always one directional. And data flows from the parent of the child to the parent cannot be done directly unless you use a callback function. This callback function is a function that is passed down from the parent so that the child component can invoke it and pass the data back to the parent to update the data. And we'll look into this a little bit later when we learn about stateful component. So two very important properties or objects or APIs, you wouldn't call it, are the state and props. Okay, these are two properties or built-in objects in React that are used to retain data and also to pass data around. Okay, so one very important concept I want to mention to you is about this pure function here. Okay, so a pure function is a function that does not update or change the input values it receives. Okay, so in this case, like for example, this function receives two variables and it just uses it in the code and that's it, right? It does not change the data. This one, however, down here, it tries to, well, actually it manipulates or updates the value it's been received. It receives. So therefore, we say that this function is not pure, or it's impure. Okay, so these two concepts are very important when we work with React. A prop is a read-only property, so therefore it follows the pure method here. Okay, so that means a prop cannot be altered. Okay, it's reserved. It's a read-only, so you cannot change its data. A state, however, can be impure. You can change its value. I mean, not like this, but of course, not like this. All functions are impure in React, but the state is able to be modified. So when you modify the state, like the impure scenario here, then React is going to be re-rendered the view, and that's how state works. Okay, that's how we do live update. And if there's a change in the state, then it modifies the data and it causes a re-render. Otherwise, if it's not changed, then therefore it's in the pure state and then it doesn't render that. We'll see that in a demo in a later video. Okay, so it's really kind of hard to understand how props and state works until we actually go into the code and do some demos. So let's go down here to these two components here, the function and class components. Okay, one here is called the stateless, and then the other is called the stateful, because again, whether one has state or one doesn't is how they're called. Okay, so function components are always stateless. They do not have state. That means they do not have this variable, this object called state, as you see down here. Only classes do, but both of them can have props. Okay, so just one distinction between the two. So it's really important how that works. All right, so let's go and do some little demos on the function components and see how they work in React. Okay, so here in the IDE, I'm going to go to the React folder, src, and open the index. And then, so notice this app here, you should have by now added navigation, and also you should have your footer added in there as well. We're gonna clean these up later to put our flight data here, but for now we'll just leave it as is. Okay, so I want to do a demo only, so I'm gonna go and create a folder here, call it demo. Inside the demo, I'll create one just exactly the same as app. Well, I mean not exactly, but with the same name. So I'll call it app.js inside the demo. Okay, inside here, just a very simple one. Import React from React. So remember, if it's a React environment, you must import this namespace. If you don't do that, React does not know it's a React component or a space. Okay, even though you don't use it here, but by the JSX will use it, and the other component will use it as well. And then I have a function app, and then just a typical function, right? If this is going to be a component, okay, if you're going to use it to display data to the view, then you must have a return statement. But just a rule, okay? If you don't return any data to the view, or if you don't display the view, then you don't need to, because a function can be used to perform some operations, like some calculations or some other operations that you need to perform, and then return that data back to wherever it's being used. So in that case, yeah, it's just a regular function. But as long as you want to use that as a view, then you have to have a return statement. Inside here, you have to have at least something, either an empty string for no reasons, I guess, but you must have it, or usually you put a div or other tags in there. And this is, you always have one root component element here. You cannot have multiple at the same level. So I can have like this. Okay, it won't work. This is just a rule for React. Okay, so one root component or element, and then all inside here, it doesn't matter. Okay, and then once I've done that, I need to export it. Okay, so export default. If this is the only thing that you want to export, then you must use the default. Okay, like this. If it's more than a couple of functions you want to export, then, well, right, you have to do it differently. So for example, let's just say it doesn't be function anything you want to export out. Let's just say I have let x is 10. If I want to export that too because I want to use it, then you have to do it differently. Okay, so when you do like that, then you have to change the remote report to nothing, and you pass that as an object. You pass both of those out like this. Okay, if you have more than two, if it's just one, then you must use the default into the name of that variable to pass through. So some very basic standard rules for JavaScript import-export modules. Okay, so now this one here, I'm not gonna use this one. I'm gonna close this and just do a demo. In the index, however, I'm gonna not use this one, and I'll use the one I just created from the app, from the demo folder, and then the app. Okay, so so nothing changes here. It will load the same page, except it's going to be a blank, empty page here. Okay, so now in here, I'm going to let's just say that I have a variable, call it point. Okay, is 10. Okay, like a typical JavaScript, and you want to display that inside the view here. So you put the curly braces and then point, right? You display that to the view. So if I save that, now let's go and run this app. Let's see, make sure it works for us, right? Cd React, and then my React, and then now I just do npm start, and hopefully it runs. Hopefully there are no errors. It seems to be working, so it should automatically open the browser. Okay, here we go. I think it's using the full screen. I might have to switch it off. Okay, so I have a problem here, right? It says point is not defined. Okay, so that's one very important thing I want to mention to you. Let me escape this first and go back to the regular view here. Okay, so line 4, it says point is not defined because right now we put point is equal to 10, and I'm going to close this down here. So remember that in React always use this strict mode. Strict mode, so that means every variable that you create, okay, if it's not in a class space, okay, if it's like this, you must use the word let or var, right, or const, misspelled. Okay, you must specify that, otherwise it won't let you do it. Okay, so just say I'm going to call it, I'm going to change this, I'm going to call it let for now, and save it again. Go back to my browser. Hopefully it loads this time. So here we go. Very tiny on the left here, 10. Okay, so let's modify this a little bit to make it a little more legible. I want to add style sheets in here. So I can do inline style. In React, you must do it this way. Inline style. This style is a typical the same tag. Inside here, you must put two curly braces. It's an object. And the name of the property will be like, I'm going to say margin, and then followed by the value. It's going to be in string. Let's put 25px, and I also want to add another one. maybe the text align. So notice that text align in regular CSS would be text dash align, right? Remember, this is not you know, irregular JavaScript or HTML or CSS. It's TypeScript, so you must use the JavaScript version, text align, like that, and then colon, let's just say center, and I'll also add one more thing, one font. Just say font size, we'll just put 20. Kind of big, but we'll see. Okay, save that, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, a little bit better. Not a whole lot, but okay, so at least we see 10 there. All right. Let me just zoom it in. I can see a little bit bigger. Okay. So 10. That's fine. That's okay. So now, and so you can see that you cannot use like this dot, you know, total is, you know, 1 like that. This only reserves for a class component. You cannot use that in this context here. However, if it's a regular JavaScript file, not in the React context, then that's fine. You can use this as a class constructor, I mean a function constructor, to create objects out of it. But in React, you cannot use this in a function. That's why it doesn't have state. Okay, and also you cannot use like this state and then something, right? So that's that's a class component. So now, so you notice that when I pass data from here to the view, okay, if I go and in here, let's just say when I go add a button, and this is legal, by the way, you have to close it, right, because it's XML. You can do that, or you can do like that. You must close it. And I'm going to add a button here. Just say update. And we're going to update the data points here. So we're going to add an event here, on click event. And this click event is going to go and call a function to update the data. So let's say that up here I'm going to have a function, a very simple function, update me. I'll put the lowercase down here. Well, not there yet. I'm going to change the data point to a new number. So I'm going to say point is equal to, when we do a math random number between 1 and 10, and I'm going to floor it. Okay, so I'm going to put math floor. So I'm just want a whole number. Basically, I'm doing. I'm going to change this to a new random number every time, and they should update here when you click it. Right? That's what your expectation would be. So let's say that here I'm going to call this function called update me. So notice I did not put the parentheses. Okay, if you do that, it's going to invoke it. It's incorrect. As an event, you should not invoke it in this way. Just call the function name, and it should update. Okay, so at the same time, I want to make sure it really does update. I'm going to write to the console point. Okay, so let's save and run and go back to the browser again. So here we go. I'm going to press F12 to see the console here, make sure there are no errors. Okay, so when I click update, okay, you see that it does not change the data on the view, even though the data has been changed to 7 now. I click it again, get a random number between 1 and 10, or 1 and 9 basically. Okay, so this is why we say this is a pure function, right? Pure function, therefore the state has not changed, right? Because it doesn't have state. The value does not change because it doesn't have the lifecycle hooks attached to this object or this function, and therefore when you make changes, even though the actual data has been changed, it does not know that, and because it doesn't know, React does not update the view. Okay, so even though the actual data has been changed. Okay, now to make this work, you will use the regular traditional JavaScript method, right? You will have to go something like, you know, you can bind this into a like a span, and then I put that inside the span tag like this. Inside the span, I might have an ID. We'll call it me, right? And then out here, you will do something like, you know, the traditional document that get element by ID. It's called me, and then the me would change the inner HTML to, you know, the point. That's just the typical traditional method to do it. I'm rewriting everything here. Of course, it's different from what I have, but that's how you do it in a traditional environment. So if I save this again, if I do it now, then I update because I'm using the DOM. But this is not how React works, right? It uses this state to manage this data. And so in the next video, we'll be doing that. We're using the class method here. So let's see. Well, back in here, my final note, I mentioned to you that if you have a function, I'm using a function inside another function. That's completely legal, of course. So this function, I'm just using it to perform some operations. As you can see, I did not use this as a view, as a component. So I don't need the return statement in there. So I don't include that in the tag either, right? So of course, functions are meant to do that. But if you want to use it as a component, again, you must have a return and you must have some tags to display your data. So this is an example of a function component.